Hello everyone, the beginning of another week means another batch of Arlecchino changes, and I swear every single week seems to have some very impactful changes on her kit. I think we're almost at the end of the Arlecchino rollercoaster ride that is her beta. And if you've been following all the Arlecchino news, such as everything I've covered on my channel, it can definitely get extremely confusing, so I'll try to analyze and explain this week's changes in both a detailed and easy to understand manner. So let's get right into it. First, her alternate movement ability where she flies with one wing. You can do it for 5 seconds now, and it costs 40 stamina. Very cool. Next, her normal talent got a bunch of number changes. 3 key things to note here. First, the requirement of her enhanced pyro normals is back to 30% bond, which was the original value. Second, her enhanced normals now consume 7.5% of her current bond of life, increased from the previous 6.5%. And third, the enhanced multiplier you get on your normals, which scale on the bond of life, have been decreased back to its original value in Arlecchino's first beta version, 238%. One side tangent related to this is that they also nerfed C1, decreasing the additional ratio it gives to the enhancement ratio from 120% to 100%. Still a very strong constellation though. As for all the multiplier changes on her normal attacks, some were slightly increased, some were slightly decreased, it really doesn't matter. The only big number change was that her charged attack multiplier was slightly decreased, but she's not charged attack oriented anyway, so the change is pretty irrelevant. Just solely looking at the normal talent changes, this is overall nerf. However, the reason for this is to account for her skill changes. Her skill works the exact same way as it was changed last week. 30-second cooldown, reduced by normal attacking, and has 2 stages of blood debt now. The only thing they changed is the amount of blood debt she gets from consuming the blood debt with her charged attack or killing the enemy, and they buffed this number by a lot. Up to 130% bond after waiting the 5 seconds. Combined with the normal talent changes, this is overall a buff in damage. Now the last change, which in my opinion is the biggest update from last week, is in her ultimate. It still is a nuke, it still resets her skill cooldown, it still heals as well, but the multipliers were changed. I've done some example calcs on the healing value using what I think are some reasonable HP attack and bond of life assumptions. With my assumptions, the actual healing value hasn't changed in a significant way. However, if your Arlecchino had more attacks such as from Bennett ult and your Arlecchino bursted in Bennett circle, then the healing loss from the change would have been greater. However, the biggest and in my opinion unfortunate change is that Arlecchino's burst does remove any blood debt that were on the enemies. This was rumored as a hotfix or a potential bug from last week's beta updates, but it's pretty much confirmed to be true in this week's changes. So those are all of the Arlecchino changes this week, but what did the changes actually mean for her? I'll cover the ult clearing all blood debts first. If you watched my previous video on Arlecchino covering last week's changes, which made her skill a 30-second cooldown and her ult resetting her skills cooldown, you'll know that I called Arlecchino Pyro Alhytham. This is because assuming Arlecchino's burst didn't remove any blood debt, you could skill, set up with your supports, then you can go back to Arlecchino to ult, reset your skill, charge attack to get your bond of life, do some enhanced normals before switching back to your supports to refresh their skills, then you can finally go back to Arlecchino to get your bond of life from her second skill, overall effectively splitting her total uptime just like Alhytham can in his teams. With the confirmation that Arlecchino's burst removes all blood debt, split uptime doesn't really work anymore. With the change at steps 3 and 4 as shown, once you ult and charged attack, the charged attack will not consume the blood death because it will be gone. So you don't get any bond with the rotation I proposed previously at this step. Now you could technically force the split uptime rotation, but it will require much more waiting for blood death to charge, which overextends the rotation, so I'm not too confident in it. But who knows, maybe some TCR will cook something up. But because of this rotation change, we are back to Arlecchino's original rotation format of scale into support setup and then switch back to get Arlecchino's bond and deal damage with her normals. With this, her ult is solely a source of healing and she is not reliant on it for damage at all. You just have to make sure you ult if you need healing either at the start or the end of the rotation so you don't screw over your enhanced normal attacks, because if you ult while you're doing your enhanced normal attacks, it clears your bond of life so you screw up your rotation. You effectively don't use the ult for resetting her skill cooldown anymore. You just rely on her normal attacks to reduce her skill cooldown. And from what I've seen, one of the optimal combos is just 3 N4s into a dash cancel. Her 4th hit is a double hit, giving her 15 total enhanced hits, which reduces her skill cooldown to 18 seconds, making her rotations 18 seconds long rather than the potentially longer 22 seconds with split uptime. And with shorter rotations, we are back to Arlecchino being more reliant on Bennett again. With shorter rotations, Bennett's buff can last most if not the entirety of Arlecchino's field time, and without any inherent attack buffs, Arlecchino really appreciates Bennett's circle buff. Does she need Bennett? No, but she definitely really appreciates him for damage. One last thing that I wanted to mention is that there is a possibility where just not ulting increases your second rotation's damage. You end a rotation with about 40% bond, but if you don't ult, you don't clear it. So you can start the second rotation with 40% bond, add another 130% you'll get from the skill for a total of 170% bond. This incentivizes a high risk, high reward playstyle, as not ulting means no healing, so you have to be more skilled in not taking damage. So with all these changes over the weeks, we have come full circle back to her original version. No longer Pyro Alhytham, back to modern melee Yoimiya in terms of her playstyle. Arlecchino is not completely back to her original version though, because she did get various multiplier and bond of life values changed. I mentioned it was an overall buff, and here I have some calcs visualizing that this is the case. These calcs that I did compare bond of life and the damage bonus she gets from her enhanced normal attacks with Arlecchino's original kit version on the left and her most current one on the right, and just comparing the average bond of life and damage bonus from her first 15 hits, which will likely be the optimal stopping point. It's just higher now, more bond equals more damage, and the best thing here is that most of her damage is front loaded, which is good. Builds wise, nothing has really changed. Pole arms, just use any pole arm that has a good damage stat stick. Artifact sets, again, her best in slot is her new 4-piece that will come out. The only thing that I want to mention here is that for artifact stats, I don't think you need to prioritize any ER anymore, with the burst not really being important at all for damage and just basically used for healing for emergencies. You really just don't have to build any ER. It's probably better just to ignore it. Focus on other subsets such as crit, attack percent, EM if you're vaping, and lastly, covering her teams. As I said before, you can play plenty of solid teams that will work, such as different forms of vape, double hydro vape, farina vape, over vape, VV vape. You can play overload, Bennett or non-Bennett wise, and you can also play Mono-Pyro. And because I see some of the comments, you could technically still play melt. All these changes only really affect which teams that we can consider her strongest or her most optimal. With Arlecchino's kit and identity going back to her original version, here's my personal rating of her strength in her main team compositions compared with the previous versions. We are back full circle, as with shorter rotations and now seemingly inability to take advantage of split uptime shenanigans. I think we're back to Bennett teams being considered her quote best in terms of damage, especially vape teams. Again, Arlecchino's ability to do shorter uptime rotations incentivizes Bennett because of his buff and benefits the front-loaded nature of vape more than other teams like Overload. Compared to the original version of Arlecchino, however, every team comp just got an overall buff due to her number changes. Now, how good will these teams be? Again, I'm no theory crafter. Other people will do the calc job way better than I ever could, and it's way too early for accurate numbers at the moment, so give us some time for people to cook. The only thing I will say is that very preliminary calcs from J-Stern shows some potentially promising results from VV Vape again, and Arlecchino in the slot may just be better than Hu Tao in the slot. However, again, very preliminary, take that comment with a grain of salt. Now, adding Bennett again means it will be harder to add defensive utility, but again, you don't need to have him with Arlecchino. I think for most players, it'll be more comfortable having some sort of shield or resistant interruption and avoiding the circle impact gameplay. These teams are still fine, just remember it will lower her damage. So that's everything I wanted to cover on Arlecchino. Just to leave some concluding thoughts, numbers wise, I'm satisfied with the changes as it's just a buff, but I'm personally pretty bummed about Arlecchino's ult removing Blood Debt. I was very interested in Arlecchino's playstyle being similar to Alhytham if we considered last week's changes, which I thought would give her much more complexity in terms of her actual gameplay. But now split uptime rotations don't really work, so we're kind of back to melee Yoimiya, which is a much more simple take to her overall kit. These changes also changed her overall niche in the realm of Pyro DPSs. I mentioned many times that I thought she would be the main Overload DPS, with Hu Tao reigning Vape and Linny reigning Mono-Pyro. With these changes increasing her Vape teams instead, I'm not as confident in this Overload opinion anymore, even though I feel like she is still maybe the best Overload Pyro DPS that we have. Right now, I kind of see her as the high risk, high reward carry while having the ability to do all three archetypes solidly. I do still think she is unique in the way that she works in all three archetypes of Vape, Overload, and Mono-Pyro, which is something other Pyro DPSs can't do as well as Arlecchino at the moment, in my opinion. And if some of the promising Vape calcs are true, then skillful players that can overcome some of her survivability issues can be rewarded with one of the best C0 Vape teams in the game. But who knows, future character releases can change this idea, maybe even next week's beta updates for Arlecchino can change this at the rate we're going. Hope that was clear and helpful to you all. Feel free to leave your thoughts on these changes or any questions in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.